Hello, and thank you so much for coming to our webinar today, CMDB-driven vulnerability management with Amazon Inspector and Cloudaware. Today, we will cover how you can manage vulnerabilities across your AWS resources, including across your compute, your containers, and your code. And by using a partner solution such as Cloudaware, you can actually extend that vulnerability management solution to both hybrid environments as well as multi-cloud with a contextualized CMDB driven methodology to approach vulnerability management at scale. Today, we're going to cover firstly introductions, who we are. We will be joined by Cloudaware's general manager, and we'll hear from him in just a second. And then we're going to be putting it together context around what vulnerability management looks like in terms of common challenges that CISOs see today. Next, we're going to touch on vulnerability management best practices. So, thinking about vulnerability management not only from an AWS perspective, but also how you can actually extend vulnerability management at scale across different environments. Then we're going to deep dive a little bit into our Amazon Inspector service, which is the AWS native service for vulnerability management. And then I'm going to pass it over to my co speaker to talk about Cloudaware and how Cloudaware extends Amazon's Inspector's capabilities to other environments that you might actually use within your environments today. And lastly, he's going to show us a very exciting demo and a joint use case. So stick around to actually see what Cloudaware looks like and how Amazon Inspector works with Cloudaware. So, as promised, speakers today, my name is Kimberly Dixon, and I'm a worldwide go to market security specialist with Amazon Web Services. I cover services on AWS such as Amazon Inspector, Amazon Guard Duty, AWS Security Hub, Amazon Security Lake, AWS Detective, as well as Amazon Macy. Mikhail, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, Kimberly. Hi, everybody. Kimberly, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for hosting us over for this webinar. My name is Mikhail Malamud. I'm a general manager at Cloudaware. I have been working with AWS since very early days, when AWS just had a single solution architect. So this was back in 2007, and I have been working at Cloudaware for more than 15 years already as well. So very excited to be here and discuss some best practices around vulnerability management.
Absolutely. So, very happy to have you today, Mikhail. And when we first started talking about vulnerability management, one of the key things we wanted to put into context was the common challenges that CISO sees today, especially when it comes with vulnerability management. From an AWS perspective, we see customers struggle with the difficulty of scan coverages in high complexity environments. From an AWS perspective, this could mean multiple accounts. So, customers that have hundreds or even thousands of AWS accounts that they now have to think about actually doing vulnerability management across their compute, their code, as well as their containers. Amazon Inspector integrates with AWS organizations, allowing you to do that multi account management. But then the vulnerability management complexities actually compound when you think about it from a multi region perspective, or even from a hybrid environment, or even from a multi cloud perspective. And that's where a partner like Cloudaware can really help. Mikhail, do you want to talk a little bit around how Cloudaware can actually help with that first point, thinking about that scan coverage across those high complexity environments?
Absolutely, Kimberly. A lot of our customers are enterprise organizations, and there are several kind of demographical attributes that unite them together. Majority of our customers use multiple cloud providers. They'll use Amazon and another cloud provider. They'll use Amazon and have a substantial on-prem infrastructure still present. So I would say large, sprawling, complicated hybrid environments is a number one attribute. The second attribute is that a lot of our customers grow through acquisitions, mergers. And so what happens is organizations like for example, Salesforce, they buy like five companies every year, or Cisco, they're prolific acquirers of other companies. And what happens is when you acquire other companies, when you merge, purchase new technology, you end up with very diverse environments. And the very first thing that we see when we onboard new customers and we load all of their digital infrastructure into Cloudaware, we notice that sometimes 30%, 40%. I've seen as much as 60% of their infrastructure has no scan coverage at all. So that's a huge problem because we're talking about basically being completely blindsided. And one of the ways that we are working with them is automating the enablement of the AWS inspector. I'm going to talk about that, more during the demo and in later slides. But because a lot of agent-based tools will require agents to be installed in order to achieve scan coverage. One of the key benefits of what's very attractive to me is agentless capability of AWS Inspector. And so what we're able to do is very quickly enable AWS Inspector for many of our customers and bump that scan coverage. So that's one way where we help. We also work with customers other scan tools. If they have available licenses from other scanning tools that they've already purchased, well, why not? Cloudaware has the technology to very quickly enable those scanning tools to increase the coverage. And this is, kind of like brings me up to the second point of managing multiple vulnerability scan tools. Um, is it is pretty much the de facto that I have yet to see an enterprise organization, like a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 1000 organization, that uses single observability tool or a single vulnerability scan tool. It's a unicorn, and everybody has ends up with multiple tools. And one of the things that I hear, I'm just gonna, say it straight out. One of the most common objections that I hear in relationship to AWS Inspector saying, "Well, it's an AWS only tool," and in my answer to them is, "So what? It's an amazing AWS tool, and we can basically have 100% of your AWS infrastructure, both conventional EC2 based, Lambda, container based infrastructure. We can have that scanned tomorrow, and we can then merge vulnerability results with whatever other vulnerabilities you have from other tools, be it Palo Alto, Wiz, CrowdStrike, doesn't matter, Tenable, Qualys. We can take that. So I think modern enterprise needs to be equipped to be managing multiple vulnerability scan tools. If you think you can design your vulnerability management program around a single tool, I think that's being naive and not strategic. And moving on to the third kind of bullet is about security debt. Is okay, fine. Let's look what happens the day after we achieve the full scan coverage, right? Is the most CISOs will be horrified. I mean, many of them already know this, that they have an absolutely enormous security debt. Once we have customers whom we've helped to go from 60 to 90% scan coverage, or 80 to like 98% scan coverage, the very first thing that we realize is that they have 300,000 critical vulnerabilities, 500,000 critical vulnerabilities, and that security debt is growing faster than they're able to remediate it. So definitely a huge problem. We'll talk about it in more slides down the road, but these are the three critical issues: is achieving scan coverage, knowing how to manage multiple tools, and dealing with a large and growing security debt. So these are the topics we're going to explore today.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we designed Amazon Inspector, we made sure that you are able to actually integrate and actually get these Amazon Inspector findings into any tool that you might use. So we make sure that's integratable with our partners, interoperable, and that the vulnerabilities that we find in Amazon Inspector are able to flow through into the partner solutions that customers might already have within their environments. And definitely, the third point definitely resonates with me as well. We made sure that, with Amazon Inspector, like you said, there's the ability to have both agent based scanning as well as agentless scanning for EC2. And we've created the service such as very easy for customers to actually turn on and to use within their environments today. In some cases, it's even a one click turn on to actually get the benefits of Amazon Inspector. So I'd like to move on from the slide to start talking about some of the best practices. And again, Mikhail and I, we started talking about what we wanted customers to take away from this particular webinar and the key things that we want them to understand is really these four things. Starting with thinking about again, focusing on coverage as well as visibility. In security, we have a saying that says, you can't protect what you don't know. And that's exactly what Mikhail was saying earlier, right? We want to be able to help customers increase that coverage. And again, from an AWS perspective, that coverage is around your resources. So the resources that Inspector is able to protect, such as your EC2 instances, or across, your Lambda code, or across your container images that's being stored within ECR, and this is across accounts. So really focusing on that kind of coverage and visibility and bringing it in a singular place such that customers are able to understand around what that vulnerability is within their AWS estate. And I know this is something that Cloudaware is also very passionate about. So, Mikhail, did you want to talk a bit more around, the best practices you see when you help customers onboard into Cloudaware, and even when they're using Inspector?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go through these bullets. Let me kind of peel away some layers in there. Very first thing here is focus on coverage and visibility, and I specifically differentiated coverage from visibility. Very often with large organizations, like I mentioned before, have sprawling environments. Simply knowing everything that you have is basically what is your attack surface. What needs to be scanned is something that's very important. This is where our CMDB, cloud asset management, cloud discovery products really come in to basically helping customers to discover, like, hey, this is what is scannable, this is what your potential attack surface is. And then obviously measuring what is the coverage, regardless of what the tool is, AWS Inspector, everything else. Like, hey, what are we covering today? Is it 80%? Is it 40%? Where are our low hanging fruit? Just the other day, I had working with a CISO. He had maybe like 65, 70% scan coverage. I said, well, if we enable AWS Inspector across all of your AWS organizations, just within 24 hours, we can go to like 95%. Let's do that. And so, but it's not always that easy. And so you need to keep that as a KPI, basically treat that as your an indicator that you want to, as an executive, as an engineer, you want to communicate this upstream to your management. If you're a security executive, this is what you want to see on a weekly, monthly basis, is like basically your updates from what the scan coverage is. In the demo, I'll be actually showing you a type of a dashboard that I like to present to CISOs and saying, hey, this is what our scan coverage looks like today. Um, Second one is integrating with agnostic vulnerability management tools. AWS Inspector has a phenomenal API that allows us to extract all of the vulnerability details and take the CVE data inside the vulnerability, correlated with other known vulnerability databases. So it's a first tier vulnerability management tools in terms of like its ability to interrogate through an API. And obviously, if we can interrogate it through an API, then we can develop capabilities around it. So ask yourself, like, hey, out of all the tools I have, which ones have good APIs? Are they modern? Do my developers know how to work with these APIs? Um, Cloudaware has native support for probably a dozen different vulnerability scan tools. So if you feel like this is not something you want to tackle, then consider working with somebody like Cloudaware. We're going to extract all of the vulnerability data for you, and we're going to aggregate it. Developing a remediation pipeline. That is probably one of the most important things that I see in terms of creating a best practice, because no matter what tools you have, no matter what scan tools you have, what vulnerability management you do, if there is no remediation pipeline, well, it's just statistics. about vulnerabilities, but the vulnerabilities are still going to be there. We're, not going to be making a lot of progress. And here is what I mean by remediation pipeline. Every organization is an organization of constrained resources. I doubt that there is an organization today that can just wave a magic wand and say, we're going to fix everything. You can't do it. The amount of effort is absolutely insane to be able to remediate everything. So, an organization has to basically prioritize, has to say, these are the things that we are going to um, put our energy into. Okay. And a good remediation pipeline has something, as I will show you later in the demo, has something that's called initiatives. And then with initiatives, we have remediation tasks or remediation groups. And within that, each individual remediation. So basically, we have to define as part of our pipeline what we're going to focus on now. And everything else, we're going to have to say, this will have to wait. Otherwise, you're just standing in front of Mount Everest and you're like, you have no path to getting to the top. And so it's very important to do this. And the last point is kind of more future state that we should all be aspiring to. Very few organizations have gotten there, but I am a strong believer. Over the past few years, I've seen customers having very robust security teams, very robust set of products, and they're still barely making progress with their security depth because everything like one CTO I've met recently at the tech conference, he said whatever we deploy today is going to become a security debt tomorrow. And that is very true. And because of that, um, we need to create processes to remediate significantly faster than new security that is introduced. And the way to do that, the very first rule of holes is basically stop digging. To that In that sense, what we need to do is to create a best practice where if you have vulnerabilities that have been identified in dev or QA environments, we should not be promoting that code to QA or to staging or to production. So we need to integrate security and vulnerability into change management. I will talk about that in more later, but these are the top best practices that I would share with you.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key things that Inspector does really well is looking at that contextualization of what a particular finding actually is. So understanding that criticality and helping with that prioritization. So I'll touch about that when I start deep diving into Amazon Inspector. But very quickly, I just want to present some of the AWS detection and response services that you can use in conjunction with Amazon Inspector to understand your environment and the security posture of your environment today. So, when we talk about our AWS security services, I'm going to talk about the third one down, which is our Amazon Guard Duty service. But all of our Amazon detection and response services is really built to actually help you continuously detect and respond to security risk across the environment and across your workloads. And the Amazon Guard DD service is actually a threat detection service that continuously monitors AWS accounts as well as workloads for malicious activity and delivers detailed security findings for both visibility as well as remediation. Our Amazon Inspector service, which is the key point for today, is our automated vulnerability management service that continuously scans AWS workloads for software vulnerabilities as well as unintended network exposure. And that unintended network exposure is that contextualization that we're going to deep dive into in just a second. Moving on, we have our Amazon Detective service that allows you to actually do investigations around security findings that occur within your environment today. Using Amazon Detective, you can actually do forensic root cause analysis to actually understand entry points as well as how different resources have been affected by a singular security event. And lastly, all of these services actually integrate with our Amazon Security Hub service. Amazon Security Hub does two things. Firstly, it's a cloud security posture management service that allows you to actually codify some best practices. So we have some best practices, such as the AWS security best practices, our PCI DSS or standards, and allows you to actually check your compliance against these compliance checks. But more than that, it also actually helps aggregates findings across accounts as well as cross regions. So findings from Amazon Inspector, findings from Amazon Guard Duty, cross accounts and cross regions in a single place for you to understand your AWS environments and the risks that pose towards your AWS environments at scale. So I'm going to deep dive a little bit around Amazon Inspector, and Mikhail's going to help me as well talk about how Cloudaware actually augments Amazon Inspector as we go through this. So, firstly, like I said, Amazon Inspector is an automated vulnerability management service that continuously scans AWS workloads for software vulnerabilities as well as unintended network exposure. One of the key things of Amazon Inspector is that it integrates with AWS organizations. And because of that, you are able to gain centralized visibility of your AWS environments across your AWS organizations. Within a few clicks, you're able to deploy Amazon Inspector to look at not only protecting your code, but also looking at your images within ECR, as well as your compute and container instances as well. One of the key things that we have within Amazon Inspector is around the prioritization and contextualization of that security findings. So Amazon Inspector takes in our vulnerability seeds, feeds from NVD, for example, and it comes up with that CVSS score that it takes from these NVD. However, there's also a separate score within Amazon Inspector called the Inspector score, and that enables Inspector to actually increase or decrease an NVD CVSS score based on what we understand of the localized or network based vector. So, for example, if this particular EC2 instance, has a network path out to the internet that then makes it more likely to be exploitable, we actually increase an Amazon Inspector score above what we see within the NBD or the CVSS scores that we actually receive. And that allows you then to actually think about that prioritization. The next thing that Amazon Inspector does is it really helps around automating those workflows and helping you take action. And like Mikhail said, Mikhail, would you like to talk a little bit around how Cloudaware actually helps with that automation of those workflows and to take action with these inspectors' findings?
Absolutely. I also like to comment on the contextualization, because that is something that these are the two areas where we work together quite a bit. Um, we take the context. First of all, the customized scoring in AWS Inspector is a very powerful feature. I was so happy to see when AWS rolled that out, because I've had customers for the last 10 years coming to us and saying, hey, can we customize the scoring? And what we do is we take the AWS Inspector scoring and then we take it to the next level, because what we do is we take the vulnerability from AWS Inspector, map it to a CI in CMDB. The CI in CMDB is mapped to the service in the service catalog, and the service catalog has all kinds of other interesting details. How important is this application to the business? Is this a back office application? Is this front office? Is this a mission critical application? Is this not? And so, just like AWS takes the network vector, we then take business vector and then do our own adjudication of the CVSS score. So I love that capability, and that is something that we work on together quite a bit. And as far as workflows to take actions, absolutely. There are so many things that we can do together. Many times, a vulnerability remediation involves something as simple as running a YAM update or scheduling a patching service. Or maybe it's time to terminate a resource because of other indicators. And so in CMDB, we have a workflow platform that's connected with AWS Lambda, with AWS Event Bridge. And so using those integrations, we can very quickly kick off and orchestrate various remediation actions when it's possible, and when it's doable. It's a very powerful tool. um, I also want to say this is that if it's while automation is extremely powerful and we should be taking advantage of it, you don't also like think that you can automate every remediation of every single vulnerability. That's not, a realistic approach that automation and AI is going to fix every vulnerability for you. It's it's not going to happen. It can help you to prioritize things. So yeah, definitely look forward to working on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I wanted to drive home something that Mikhail mentioned earlier. And that really is around that scale with simplified management that you do get with Amazon Inspector. And Mikhail touched on this a little bit earlier, whereby, with Amazon Inspector, you are actually able to seamlessly scan EC2 instances, both with an agent-based scanning as well as agentless scanning. And you can actually instruct Inspector to actually swap between the two. So that means that you can continuously have the ability to actually scan for vulnerabilities within EC2 no matter what. Of course, we also have the ability to actually look at that automated discovery as well as continuous scanning across ECR, across Lambda functions, as well as around our container images as well. One of the key things I think that, Mikhail, when we spoke about Inspector, we talked about that ability for Amazon Inspector to actually centralize and manage SBOM exports centrally. So Inspector allows, to actually have a centralized, managed software bills and material exports for all of our monitored resources. And I think you mentioned that that's something that Cloudaware can also help with, yes?
Absolutely. Yes. SBOM is very important. It prepares organizations for zero-day exploits. If tomorrow some software vendor announces that they have a backdoor in their application, all of a sudden, and sometimes vulnerability vendors, are not even have it in their scan tools to be able to detect this. But you know that the vulnerability is there in a specific version of the software. So SBOM is very important for us to be able to very quickly assess what our exposure is. And when customers want that SBOM, they want it across everything. They want SBOM from AWS, from Azure, from on-prem. And this is one of the core capabilities at Cloudaware is we will actually take this BOM inventory that we've inferred from AWS's Inspector API, and then we'll merge that with SBOM from vCenter. We'll merge that with SBOM from Bare Metal, and then combine it together to present customer with a complete picture. And I think that's extremely valuable to have this information at your fingertips.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that we continuously do at Inspector as well is to make sure that we're increasing, our scan coverage, right? And that leads us to a few things and few recent enhancements in Amazon Inspector that have just been very recently announced, some as recent as last month. And I wanted to quickly talk about, some of the recent enhancements before I pass on to Mikhail completely to actually demo Cloudaware. One of the key things that we focused on was to enhance more image scanning. So Amazon Inspector is now able to scan ECR images for minimal and security hardened container based images such as Scratch, Distroless, as well as ChainGuard. This actually expands and increases our Amazon Inspector image coverage by up to 10 to 15%. And touching on a little bit around Mikhail said earlier around, looking at third-party code, for example, or third-party software, um, as well as along the supply chain. We've actually expanded the ecosystems that Amazon Inspector can also scan for. So we now have enhanced detections for Amazon ECR for application installs, such as WordPress, Tomcat, Chrome, Node.js runtime, etc. And this is all available, as Mikhail said earlier, via the Inspector's SBOM scan API. And this really allows you to have that kind of visibility into the vulnerabilities into your ecosystem components, as well as in any third-party software that you might install. And lastly, we just launched the ability for customers to actually identify discontinued operating systems that are running in both Amazon EC2 as well as ECR container images. This just allows more prioritization of risk within your environments. So, for example, if Amazon Inspector sees that there's a discontinued operating system, that is definitely something that you should be going in and patch because without that, you might be exposing yourself to some vulnerabilities that are no longer supported. So, That's it for me. Talking about Amazon Inspector, and now I really want to spend a lot of time talking about Cloudaware. So, Mikhail, take us away.
For sure. I love the ability to the fact that you guys are now able to help customers to detect discontinued operating systems, because that's where honestly there is a lot of security that companies are using outdated, and there's no way you can fix it. That's it. It's gone. You just need to figure out a way to get rid of it, to shut down that infrastructure. So what is Cloudaware? I've been kind of like dropping hints throughout the presentation, but what do we really do? Yes, CMDB and cloud asset management is our core offering, but it is much more than that. Cloudaware is like an operating system for your cloud infrastructure. If you're familiar with AWS's well-architected framework, Cloudaware is an embodiment of that framework. It has modules not just for vulnerability management; it has modules for governance, for FinOps, for observability, and asset management. Essentially, Cloudaware's mission is to enable organizations to be amazing at managing their cloud infrastructure and to achieve a state of operational excellence. And to that extent, we have modules, as I mentioned, in all of these pillars of cloud management. Let's take a deeper look at actual vulnerability management platform. I promise you, a few more minutes, and then we're gonna dive straight into the demo. So, but I think this is a very good picture of what we Cloudaware does in a context of Cloudaware, in the context of vulnerability management. So, first thing that we see on the left is Cloudaware is able to ingest vulnerabilities event data from multiple vendors. We work with AWS Inspector as well as other vendors that have been around for more than a decade, like Tenable and Qualys and so on and so forth. Um, and then we have a full set of tools to help you to build a vulnerability management program. Not only we're going to aggregate this data for you, we're going to help you to normalize it, to dedupe it, to visualize it, track progress, and then we'll also integrate with third-party ticketing systems. So if you use Jira or ServiceNow, we're going to batch remediation efforts into those systems and feed it to the security engineers, DevOps engineers, whoever is going to be working on fixing this. So the core of Cloudaware's offering is our CMDB. This is where every CMDB is home to what we call your digital infrastructure. So your digital infrastructure is everything AWS, on-prem, other cloud providers, and also CMDB has integrations into all of your security tools. And so what we do is we overlay all of your assets with vulnerability data. So what this allows us to do is kind of take a step above from what most vulnerability management tools do. Is they're mostly designed for like um, just the people who are managing vulnerability in general. But if I am a developer for a specific application, I don't care about 100,000 vulnerabilities in general. I want to be able to know what are the vulnerabilities that are impacting my application. And so Cloudaware caters not just to the that SecOps audience, they care to a specific, engineers who just are concerned with their specific application and say, what do I need to fix? And Cloudaware takes that CMDB context, and we're able to generate vulnerability management dashboards for individual application teams so that they're not overwhelmed with everything that's going on within the organization. Okay, second thing is multi-sourcedness. As I've explained this, if you're trying to build a vulnerability management program, you have to be able to support multi-sourcedness. If you're trying to build a modern vulnerability management program on the basis of a single tool, like I said, it's rather unrealistic. And then being the CMDB, we are very closely tied to the CI/CD process or change management process. And this is where Cloudaware acts as a digital gate inside your change management. Basically, what we do is every time you are using Terraform or CloudFormation to promote your code to QA, your CloudFormation or Terraform template will make an API call to Cloudaware and saying, am I good to proceed? And what Cloudaware is going to do is say, based on what I observe in your dev environment, you have several critical vulnerabilities. You should not proceed. And this is how we stop introduction of new security debt into higher environments. So that's one of the things that we are working with our customers to accomplish. So these are most important things that I want to share with you. There is more, and I'm going to touch upon those things in the demo. And now let's actually dive into it. I'm not going to do my usual demo because that's going to take an hour. But what I want to do is focus on some specific points that I mentioned during the earlier portion of the webinar and address that. So first, let's talk about CMDB and the visibility, right? The very first thing I mentioned is, hey, how do we establish scan coverage? And in order for us to establish scan coverage, the very first thing that we need to do is understand everything that we have. This is where Cloudaware comes in very handy. You can think of Cloudaware as a centralized warehouse. CMDB, cloud asset management. Different people will use different terms, but here in this demo environment, I have every single cloud provider. That's not every single, but all the popular cloud providers are here, and also on-prem infrastructure. And the way Cloudaware works is it's very much API driven. What we can do is simply deploy a CloudFormation as a stack set or a Terraform template, and Cloudaware will be able to assume a role into our AWS account. Once it connects, and the same technology works for other cloud providers. So Cloudaware will use cloud provider native APIs, and it will go out there, connect to your Amazon, connect to Azure, connect to your on-prem vCenter, and it will completely discover the entire infrastructure that's present in there. Specifically with AWS, we support 98, 99% of all the services that are present inside AWS. So like here, let's take a look at compute. You can see everything in there, the ECR, ECS, EKS. If we go to databases, you'll see here DynamoDB databases, Elasticache, RDS. So Cloudaware basically pulls multiple regions, multiple AWS accounts, multiple cloud providers, connects to your vCenter, and it builds that centralized database. This is immensely useful. This is useful for saying, for basically establishing things like, hey, I need a complete inventory. Consider this simple use case. Let's say I have an IP address and, it's part of my security incident. And I'm not sure, do I even own this IP address? Is it in one of my AWS accounts? Is it in Azure? Is it in Google? Simply establishing whether you own a specific IP address could take forever. It could take days, hours. In Cloudaware, you're just a single search away, or you can use curl, or you can use an API call, but you have a single database to query rather than multiple databases. So, but we didn't just stop at connecting all of our cloud infrastructure. Cloudaware has this concept of digital infrastructure. What we want to do is present you as a user not just what you have, okay, but also how it's managed. So to that extent, Cloudaware has integrations, as I mentioned earlier, with all the other popular observability tools, security tools like Tenable, Qualys, Wiz, Snyk, Sophos. From observability perspective, like App Dynamics and New Relic and Datadogs and DevOps tools. Why are we integrating with those tools? To be able to answer how our infrastructure is managed in there. Let's take a look at a more specific example. Okay. In this particular case, I have a list of EC2 instances that are part of my AWS infrastructure. I've also connected AWS Inspector, and I also have another more traditional vulnerability scanning than everything, maybe either Qualys or Tenable. It doesn't matter. Here is what Cloudaware does. Cloudaware goes out there, goes to AWS, makes an API call, says, hey, give me your complete inventory, goes to Inspector, says, hey, Inspector, did you scan this machine? Goes to Qualys and says, hey, Qualys, did you scan this machine? Oh, you did. When was the last time you scanned this successfully? Did you find any vulnerabilities? What were those vulnerabilities? And let's take a look at this. Let's go and take a look at the sample EC2 instance. And if we go to the security tab, here we can see our attack surface. But I want to specifically scroll down to the section with vulnerabilities. Take a look at this. Cloudaware took data from AWS, created a what we call in CMDB a CI configuration item that we have discovered, and now went and queried third-party data source such as Qualys and brought that data into the CMDB. And here we can actually see that for this particular demo machine, I both have Inspector enabled and Qualys enabled. And so normally, I mean, this happens in production sometimes too, where we have duplicate vulnerabilities, which Cloudaware is very perfectly capable of deduping. We're going to talk about that later. But what I'm trying to show here is Cloudaware brings vulnerabilities at the infrastructure level. Okay. So for every CI, we can see what vulnerabilities are there. And it will do the same thing for Azure, for vCenter infrastructure, for anything. Okay. The other thing, while we're looking at this machine, I also wanted to show you something that's related to patches, right? And then we're going to talk later about like automation and things like that. So here is another machine. Here's the related sections. And here I want to show you something about packages and patches. So Cloudaware not only sees what vulnerabilities you have, it also understands what is your current situation with patching, what patches have been recently updated. So we also know we also know all the public attributes about this machine. We know whether it's publicly facing or not. And here we can see that this application is actually is attached to an item in our service catalog. So here I have an item in my service catalog called GBS. And we also have, since this is a CMDB, it maintains a relationship. Every CI in CMDB is associated with an item in a service catalog. And if you're not familiar with the concept of service catalog, I'm pretty sure most of you are, basically, inside service catalog, we will maintain all kinds of other business contextual data. Like, what is this service? Is it critical to the application? What's the RTO? What's the RPO? Does this contain sensitive confidential data, health data, financial data? How critical? I mean, from a vulnerability management perspective, we really want to know how critical this is to our business. And let's go back to our vulnerabilities, okay? And you can see here that our vulnerabilities have certain default CVSS base scores assigned to them. And Kim was talking earlier about how it's possible to customize scores based on the attack vector. Cloudaware takes that to the next level, and we take the service catalog context, and we can, fine tune that base score or severity even more. Okay, so now that we kind of like talked about the fact that Cloudaware has this visibility into all of our infrastructure and all those other services, I want to show you this particular dashboard. Essentially, in the very beginning, I specifically made a kind of differentiation between the coverage and visibility, right? And you can't achieve coverage unless you have visibility into all of your infrastructure. So hopefully by now I have, convinced you that Cloudaware using API has the visibility into all of your infrastructure. We will connect to your vCenter, we will connect to your Azure and AWS, and then we will connect to multiple scanning tools, including AWS Inspector, Qualys, Tenable, Palo Alto, whatever tools your organization is using, and then Cloudaware can answer one of the most important questions. We can say like, hey, out of everything you have, here is how it's being scanned. We will also be able to identify some sources of vulnerabilities. Take a look at this example. I love this. This one particular image has 889 vulnerabilities, and then there's 632 for the other one. If we just work and say like, hey, people, let's stop launching new instances from this particular AMI, our security debt is instantly going to start going down. So I love that capability within Cloudaware. Here we can also see other statistics like, hey, here are machines, here are most vulnerabilities, here is how fast you're fixing things. But I mentioned earlier that scan coverage is an important KPI, okay? And both SecOps engineers, security executives need to understand what their scan coverage is, how to improve it, and things like that. With and so let's kind of like, I want to share a little story with you. I showed a similar dashboard to the CISO of a large Fortune 500 company a few years ago, and he was like, okay, thanks for telling me this. I kind of knew this already, that our scan and his scan coverage for his organization was a lot worse. It was like around 50%. And he says like, well, I kind of already knew this. Okay. And while I find it valuable that you're telling me about it, I would really appreciate if you could actually do something about it. And that sent us on a whole new journey. Cloudaware has necessary technologies that are outside the scope of this demo, but we can substantially expedite the enablement of whatever scanning agents you want. For example, with AWS Inspector, the SSM agent is already there. Cloudaware can simply automate the enablement of AWS Inspector. I will show you how we accomplish that using workflows. But when it comes to also traditional agents like Tenable and Qualys, we can expedite the installation of the agents themselves. Okay. So Cloudaware, I don't want you to think of us as just a tool that's going to do metrics and show you where the gaps are. We're much more than that. We're actually able to then say, hey, you don't have anything. Why don't we go ahead and deploy some scanning agent technologies? Why don't we enable AWS Inspector for you by default, kind of make that part of your process? I also want to show you automation and workflows. Inside Cloudaware, the CMDB is completely live and actionable system. There are many things that can be automated. You can automate, for example, to have to set it up that the AWS Inspector is enabled by default for every new organization or AWS account. Basically, we can configure automatic enrollment. In this particular case, this is a process that will perform automatic patching of AWS images and AWS instances, like kind of like basically re-image the image if it has the if it needs to be done. So Cloudaware certainly is capable of automating things and responding to various conditions. Okay, I hope this makes sense to everybody. If you have questions, I will be providing my email address at the end of the presentation. Send it to me, and I will be monitoring that email inbox, and I will answer it. probably very first thing I'll do is give you my phone number, and I'm going to post it here, and then we can continue discussing that in there. Let's talk about another important topic, which is a software bill of material. Okay, so um, software bill of material, and Kimberly mentioned that AWS Inspector has this capability. We use the AWS Inspector software bill of material, but then we take it to the next level. In this particular case, this dashboard combines um, software bill of material not just from AWS, but Azure and vCenter, and we normalize it. I find it extremely useful, especially for scenarios where we're dealing with 0-day exploits. So, like for example, tomorrow, let's pick on somebody, SolarWinds. Let's say tomorrow, SolarWinds announces that they're having a vulnerability. Well, then it will be very easy for us to. You would just come into our dashboard and we say like, okay, where's SolarWinds running? And you can see here Cloudaware combined it from AWS physical server. So basically, we can have a software bill of materials across the base. And speaking of software bill of materials, let's go back to that machine we were looking at earlier. I wanted to show you that you have software bill of materials, not just like inside the dashboard. Every CI you're looking at, Cloudaware creates a very cool kind of a software bill of materials where we're not just telling you, hey, these are the list of processes, blah, 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 .exe is running. We actually interpret like, hey, we know that this process is a Qualys agent or this is New Relic agent, so on and so forth. We know how to interrogate it, whether it's running or maybe, it's installed, but it's not running. So if you just look for a running process, you're not going to detect it. Anyways, Cloudaware is pretty awesome at building detailed software bills of material. Okay, so we talked so far about scan coverage. We talked about enablement on automation. Touched a little bit on patching. Touched a little bit on scan coverage. And let's talk about vulnerability management and remediation pipelines. One of the most common problems I see when I start talking to a lot of new customers is I see this, right? I see a very large security debt, okay? So let's go over here and let's take a look at this. Let me actually reset this dashboard so you can see what I'm seeing. Okay, this is what I see, right? Onboard a new customer and it's like, oh my God, we have 500,000 vulnerabilities. There is no single organization that's able to remediate that many vulnerabilities. And that's a very common situation that you will see. And so it's like, it's very, I would say, demoralizing to have to deal with such a large number of vulnerabilities. And what we do at Cloudaware is we say, like, okay, let's define something that's an initiative. Since we cannot fix everything all at once, let's define an initiative. Okay. And an initiative could be something like, hey, we have a bunch of really old CentOS instances. Okay. All right, fine. So this is a way to get executive buy-in into saying, what do you want us to fix first? We cannot fix everything. Okay. So we create these initiatives, and these initiatives are defined in collaboration with business stakeholders, defining collaboration with executives, with everybody's in. Basically, we collectively as an organization essentially going to decide this is what we're going to focus on, and everything else is going to have to wait. Okay, so that's our remediation initiatives. Then once we've identified our remediation initiatives, we can then look at we can look at the remediation groups. And remediation groups is something like it's part of that initiative, but for just a specific application environment. Because the way developers are fixing, they're not going to go fix things. Oh, I'm going to go fix this one vulnerability on this one machine. They're going to say, I'm going to fix this one thing on all the machines within that specific environment for that application. So I'm going to fix all the dev boxes for application foo. Okay. And so that's the way we do this. And then Cloudaware basically is able to create a pipeline where we will, based on various attributes, sort everything out like back, like back office inside your local post office. We're going to sit there and say, okay, what initiatives does this go to? Or this doesn't belong to any initiative. Okay, we're going to set this aside and look at it. Within 2 clicks, we went from 500,000 vulnerabilities. We went from 500,000 vulnerabilities to just 6 things. So we said, listen, you don't need to worry about 500,000 vulnerabilities. So if I am a developer for this particular application, okay, I'm going to log into this dashboard. I'm going to say, like, I am the owner of this GNS application. It's going to say, okay, as a GNS owner, I want you to go and fix the 6 things. So that is very powerful because that's achievable. As opposed to when we're staring at like, oh, 500,000 vulnerabilities, like where do I start? Should I even bother starting? So basically, Cloudaware has integrations into Jira tickets, into ServiceNow, into all kinds of issue management systems. And if you have an in-house written issue management system, we work with that as well. So a lot of our enterprise clients have that. And my favorite capability is the fact that we are taking this huge security debt and we're breaking it up into smaller initiatives and we're breaking it into smaller remediation tests. Basically, we figured out a pipeline where we can reduce this to smaller chewable pieces and then feed them into various action systems like Jira, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the last thing that I want to stress is integrating this into the into CI/CD. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we do this today? Cloudaware has this concept of compliance engine. Okay, and so compliance engine is a series of policies. Not just sys benchmarks. Is essentially like there is a library of about 1,000 plus policies of how we want to be configured. Here are some examples in there, like, hey, our Athena encryption, at rest, obviously needs to be enabled and things like that. I think you all have seen these types of policies because there's a lot of other products on the market that have similar capabilities. As a matter of fact, if you compare them, the policies are almost exactly the same. What's different about Cloudaware Compliance Engine? There are 2 things that are different about it. First, Cloudaware allows SecOps, vulnerability management people to develop policies that go beyond just AWS cloud configuration. You can write a policy saying like, hey, this particular service that we deployed is not monitored in Relic. It's not monitored in Datadog. It's not monitored in anything. Okay. You can write FinOps policies. You could say the cost of this application was supposed to be $10,000 a month, but now it's like $20,000 a month. So Cloudaware, because Cloudaware is a kind of like know-it-all center of digital infrastructure, it knows how much things cost. It knows whether they're monitored. It knows whether they're secured or not. And because of that, we can write policies about all of those things. So that's the difference number 1. A difference number 2 is we integrated this into Terraform and CloudFormation. And the way that we do this is whenever you run your, let's say, Terraform deployment template, it will actually connect. We have a provider, and that provider will connect to Cloudaware and say, hey, did this application, did this deployment pass all the policies? And if it didn't, then the Terraform deployment stops. Or we do even something more advanced where your cross account IAM role is you're not given a cross account IAM role. And so you cannot then deploy to QA or staging or production. So the second thing that we did is we integrated the policies into the CI/CD, into the change management process. Basically, Cloudaware acts as a change gate um, that says like, okay, you're good to proceed or you are not good to proceed. Because what happens is everybody else is kind of like saying, okay, we're going to deploy this vulnerable thing or misconfigure thing. Don't worry about it. It's very easy for me to redeploy. I'll fix it next week. And what happens is the security debt is growing faster than you're able to remediate it. So, one of the very first principles of basically growing security debt is don't let it get bigger, right? If you're inside the hole, then stop digging it. If you're on the wrong train, don't keep riding it. Like, get off of it, because then it's just your road back is going to like, enough with the analogies. My point is this is integrate, and then we support everything. Cloudaware is a CMDB that supports change management, but we do modern digital change management. So think of a digital gate that says, yes, go ahead, please proceed to QA, or no, you need to fix these 10 things before you proceed to QA. And you can integrate it from GitLab, from Argo CD, you can integrate from AWS Code Deploy. We support integrations with just about anything. Okay, so that's kind of a very quick rundown. I did not cover any of the FinOps capabilities. I didn't cover any of the change management capabilities because they're outside the scope. Reporting, API-based stuff. If you guys want to see more, please reach out to the email address that I'm going to provide at the end of it, and we can have a full hour one-on-one. I'll be happy to show you all of the product capabilities, answer your questions. The way that we do demos, they're done by technical people. Like I often do them, people like me do them. We're not trying to sell you anything. We can just answer your questions, show you use cases, how problems have been solved, things like that. Just to recap, what Cloudaware and AWS Inspector are able to help us to achieve is expedite the coverage for our vulnerability, whether it's accelerating the agent deployment, whether it's enabling AWS Inspector across multiple AWS organizations. Getting the coverage increased is not something that should be taking us forever. It's almost inexcusable to have poor scan coverage in modern day. So we're here to help you to get this done. And then, obviously, once we've increased our scan coverage, we are now on a good path to building remediation pipelines, automating it, and reducing our security debt overall. Kimberly, do you have any parting comments or words before we wrap up this webinar?
Always glad to see what partners are building and is able to build using our native AWS services. And of course, thank you so much for actually being an Amazon Inspector partner and doing such great work to help keep our combined customers secure. Cloudaware is available from the AWS Marketplace. So if you'd like to learn more, visit cloudaware.com. And if you've got any questions, Mikhail is here to answer them. So just email it to partners@cloudaware.com.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I really enjoyed spending this time together and having this discussion. Hopefully, our audience found this very useful as well. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.